You're listening to the OCD Stories podcast, hosted by me, Stuart Ralph. The OCD Stories is a podcast dedicated to raising awareness and understanding around obsessive-compulsive symptoms. I do this through interviewing inspired therapists, psychologists, and people who have experienced OCD. Welcome to the OCD Stories. And welcome to episode 405 of the podcast. And in this one, I got back on Dr. Steven Phillipson. Steven is a licensed clinical psychologist who specialises in CBT for OCD. We discuss the things Steve wants you to know about OCD recovery, including why the OCD topics are irrelevant, we need to show the brain that the topic is meaningless, why we shouldn't use memory to prove the OCD topic is irrelevant, the topics of OCD are only made relevant by the emotion behind it. People with OCD are not fearful people, generally speaking. They are fearful of a small amount of specific worries only. And then Steve goes on to answer questions from some of the listeners of the show. He answers whether he has OCD or not, superstition and metaphysical OCD, clarification on Steve's comment about an OCD god, dealing with the fear of death, ways to unhook from OCD thoughts, dealing with obsessing about emotional numbness, is OCD and addiction related? How to deal with intrusive thoughts in everyday moments? How much therapy homework should I do? Why am I not getting better from exposures, i.e. I'm still obsessing? Sensorimotor OCD around the anus, magical thinking around OCD, and much more. And thank you to NoCD for supporting the podcast. NoCD offers effective and convenient therapy available in the US and outside the US. To find out more about NoCD, their therapy plans, if they currently take your insurance, or to download their free app, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD stories, or the link will be in the episode description. Thank you to all of our patrons for supporting our work. To sign up to our Patreon and to check out the other benefits you'll receive as a patron, please see the link in the show notes. So thank you to Steve for his time as always. I appreciate it, and thank you to him for answering the questions, and thank you to you guys for asking those questions, and thank you for listening as always. It means a lot. And without further ado, here is Steve. Welcome back to the show, Steve.
Always good to be here, Steve. My pleasure.
Yeah, it's good to have you on. And today's mainly going to be a Q&A episode. So I asked my patrons and I asked my email list. I said I was going to get you on for Q&A episode, and these are at least some of the questions that came back, because there's quite a lot. So yeah, but before we get into that, I also asked you about something else, and it'd be good to hear your answers to that.
Sure. No, you'd asked me about certain topics that I would want all OCD sufferers and or patients to be informed about. So I thought I would start with that.
Perfect. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So the first topic is really to make the point that the topics under OCD's umbrella are totally meaningless and irrelevant in talking about aspects of the person. So if a person has thoughts of doing violence to others, if a person has thoughts of inappropriate potential attraction to children, if the person has thoughts that are against God, that all of these topics are just a creation of the random brain, and are just linked up with a distressful emotional signal, but are not in any way a reflection of a person's personality or any meaningful qualities within a human. In terms of treatment, it can't be emphasized enough that we need to show the brain that its creations, in terms of these themes that are associated with these 6 emotions that we discussed, are irrelevant and meaningless. We can't tell the brain. I could tell all of my patients that their brain creativity is completely irrelevant, but the person, in order to achieve the benefits of ERP, you need to demonstrate to the brain that its own creativity is insignificant and meaningless. So a lot of patients struggle with the idea of needing to kind of prove that they have OCD, rather than that these topics are actually significant. So a person, particularly with gay spiking or HOCD, sexual orientation OCD, they often say to me, I'm going to be the best patient ever. I just need to know I'm not gay. And then I'll do this therapy terrifically. And obviously, that is a contradiction to the way that the therapy or recovery would really have any impact. There is no way to get an answer to any OCD question, although people endlessly seek those answers. It's a condition that really betrays the foundation that humans rely on in terms of using reason to get themselves out of a predicament, rather than floating the irrationality of the condition, and using a discipline that ignores the reasoning part of the condition. So I can't convince someone that they're not a danger to children. That would be answer seeking, but we can show the brain once again that the topic is meaningless. So also, the thing about OCD or any anxiety is that in its present moment, a person can't use memory to convince themselves that the topic is irrelevant. OCD energy in the moment is always fresh and without memory. You can't say, oh, yesterday I had this association and it turned out to be meaningless. But today's association absolutely feels authentic and legitimate. And therefore, you can't really, once again, use the idea that I should be able to kind of figure out that this is irrelevant like yesterday's topic was. And what's interesting is that, OCD topics are completely meaningless without being fueled by the anxiety component. I've had patients with up to 4 different spike themes, and when the energy leaves spike theme A and goes to spike theme B, like a person had a thought of jumping off a balcony as his topic number A. His second topic was saying racist things in the office. And when his brain would light up on topic B, he had no concerns about jumping off a balcony. He had no concerns about suicidality. He looked at the thought as being insignificant and ridiculous. But boy, oh boy, when topic B lit up emotionally, he was terrified that he might shout out something completely inappropriate. And then 2 weeks later, that topic would become unplugged emotionally, and he'd go back to topic A of fear of jumping off the balcony. And then once again, he'd have no concerns about losing control in the office place. So it really just goes to show that the topics of OCD are only made relevant by the emotional component that's plugged into the cognitive signal. It's also, although with ERP, we don't really use a lot of cognitive restructuring, it is still sort of tragic how many people think that if their brain is conjuring up these really kind of dark or inappropriate thoughts, that it does say something meaningful about them. And so in that regard, there can be an educational component to really recognize that, 95% of humans without OCD report having these types of very dark or violent or inappropriate associations, and that there's nothing, once again, about them as a person just because their brain is coming up with these thoughts. And it's still very tragic how many people have this idea, if my brain has bad thoughts, that's a representation of some part of me. I still kind of have a tug of war with certain patients about, their brain voice being a reflection of their identity. They say, well, is there a different person inside of me? And it's like, no, it's not a different person. It's just the machine as the brain can produce thoughts that are completely aside from our ability to choose them or control them. And it's very common, and I mean, my brain comes up with all kinds of very, very dark associations. I just kind of laugh at it and give it all kinds of permission. but it's still, very, very upsetting and disappointing and frustrating how many people think, if their brain comes up with bad associations, it just says something negative about them. Really important to understand that is people are born with OCD. OCD is a manifestation of a part of the brain that sends these kind of broken emotional signals, predominantly anxiety. And it's not something that comes from bad parenting, and it's not something that is a reflection on their kind of personality style. People say, oh, they're so OCD about something. And it's tragic how often OCD is confused as perfectionistic tendencies. Someone will say, oh, I don't have OCD because I don't make my bed every day. And so there's still a lot of misunderstanding about the very basic nature of OCD. Also, people with OCD are not a type of person. So, people with OCD, are not like fearful. I once made a tragic mistake about 30 years ago where I said something to the effect that, people who are OCD tend not to be big risk takers. And one of the women in my group that I said that said, hey, wait a second. I jump out of airplanes with parachutes on my back and I go class 6 whitewater rafting. I'm a huge risk taker. It's just I'm afraid that my food has poison in it. So, it's really important to understand that there is no kind of type of person with OCD. It's just a condition that with the specific topic, it lights up a sense of fear, but it really has no reflection about a person's overall fearful nature. So those are basically the points that I came up with as kind of important guidelines for anyone with OCD or curious about OCD to be informed about.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, thank you for sharing those. I'm sure many people will find that helpful and interesting. So let's jump into the questions. The first question was, so I know, as far as I'm aware, you don't have OCD, right? But
the nicest thing any patients have said to me is they say, Steve, I know you're a liar. And I go, what am I lying about? And they go, well, you say you don't have OCD, but I know that you do have OCD because anyone who understands it to this degree would have to have OCD. So that's kind of the nicest thing anyone ever could say to me as a professional. But no, I haven't had a day of OCD. I've had panic attacks. So in that regard, I can understand the nature of how powerful and manipulative anxiety can be. But I've never had OCD.
No, and of course you've had depersonalization as well.
Yes.
Correct. Yeah.
Although that to me is like a panic attack on steroids. Okay. It's not so separate from a panic attack. It's just when a panic attack goes nuclear.
Yeah. Okay. So the rest of these questions now are gonna they may not have a flow to them. So the first question after that one is, could you please ask Dr. P about superstition OCD and metaphysical OCD? And then maybe similar to this, in the second to last episode with Dr. Phillipson, you also discussed about an OCD god. Do you remember that,
yeah.
Steve?
Yeah, of course, yeah. Sure.
He said, I don't know if it's a he actually, because the name wasn't there, but would you like to get, they would like to get more clarification on that as well. So I guess clarification on the OCD god and then superstitious and metaphysical OCD.
Okay, so the OCD god is just sort of a bit of a euphemism. It's a bit of a joke about how people with OCD sometimes the world brings them their spike theme, in a very kind of unlikely way. One of my favorite instances is a woman who had OCD about drowning her daughter. She had spikes about, when she would give her daughter a bath, that she might lose control and drown her daughter. And one day she was rinsing her daughter's hair with water, getting the shampoo out. And her daughter said to her, "Mommy, you're drowning me." So that's a great example of sort of an OCD god thing. Another person has gay OCD, and at work there's a guy who's always joking with him, and of course one of the things he jokes with him regularly about is he thinks my patient is gay. just as a way of sort of having, you would say, taking the piss out of him. But so, when he's joked about as being gay, it just kind of triggers, his OCD. Superstition or metaphysical OCD is sort of, once, as I said, no theme is any really different than another. However, people with that spike theme tend to actually coexist with some perfectionism as sort of a greater likelihood. But the theme about like why am I here, or are we living a simulation? Those are, I think, wonderfully entertaining questions, but the reason not to engage with those very entertaining questions is because the person with those themes, once again has this tremendous energy that demands emotionally that they get a resolution and an understanding of these topics, rather than it being a very entertaining kind of debate topic. It turns into a never-ending driving search for a resolution and search for, kind of some answer. So they might spend lots and lots of hours going online, looking up things like proof that there is a God, proof that we're in a simulation or we're not in a simulation. So in that regard, it has sort of a bit of a unique characteristic to it.
Yeah, thank you.
Did that answer the question, Stu?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, the listener will be the ultimate judge of that, but I think so. Next question. I have many forms of OCD, but one form, which is also something we all wrestle with, is mortality. I'm not a religious person, and I'm extremely afraid of my mortality, although I'm in my early 50s. How does Dr. Phillipson recommend managing this primal fear that many of us have?
I think that it is, a topic like even metaphysical OCD that many humans kind of grapple with. But with OCD, obviously, it's a, kind of never-ending, desperate preoccupation to, kind of get an answer. And so when the person's talking about, their anxiety about their mortality, I'd want a little bit more information in terms of what the nature of their ritualizing involves. And specifically, what is it about the inevitability for all of us to kind of come to an end, become so desperate for them. I'm joking with people that I hope I live long enough to be downloaded onto a thumb drive so I can live on someone's laptop for eternity. But I'm not sure that's going to come true. But I think that, there's a differentiation from, someone who is desperately thinking about the idea that they're not going to be on this planet one day. And I wouldn't look at treating it any differently as any other spike, in terms of creating, index cards that reflect the way that his brain is prompting him about the topic, and then having him engage in multiple per day exposures that reiterate his brain's signal, to basically show his brain that he's not going to follow it, as I say, down the rabbit hole of answer seeking. So, I would say that it would be treated as any other type of, puro manifestation where, we have to show the brain that we're not going to engage with its, kind of desperate need for resolution.
Yeah, really good point. And would you ever, because I guess what comes to my mind, and this could then be feeding back into the compulsion if we're not careful, but maybe there is a slight philosophical question there outside of the OCD that this person might have once they get the OCD under control of, what is my belief system? Like if I'm a Christian, then I'm hopefully going to heaven. Like that's my certainty, my belief, my hope. If I'm a different religion, I have maybe reincarnation. Like, is there some kind of, well, or do you wait for that discussion once the symptoms are down?
Absolutely. Patients will want to engage, with discussion about many of their topics. And I'll say to them, when your brain isn't creating a desperation about this theme, we can talk about it, till we're blue in the face. I'd love to discuss things like that. And I would say, 95% of the time, when the emotions are unplugged from the topic, person's just like, nah, this really isn't that interesting to me. So, it can be very tempting, I think, for clinicians to participate in certain OCD themes that seem to be topics that, any human might grapple with, like, metaphysical OCD. Are we in a simulation, or is there a God, or what happens to me after I die? But generally speaking, without the energy, most people, like I said, 95%, they're just not really actually invested in engaging with that topic.
Yeah, good point. Okay, so the next question is, what are the top 3 go-to responses to a thought that you've become fused with? I guess hooked on, fused with. I guess how would you approach that with a client that they're just too hooked on their thoughts? So this wording may have come from, they may be influenced by ACT, and ACT obviously talks about diffusion and all of that. So that's probably what they mean of when you're really, really in the clouds or in the mud of the OCD thought.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think that in speaking to the brain as it tries to kind of grab us and kind of get us engaged deeply within the theme, I think, whatever a person defines based on his own relationship with being dismissive. So in a way, if a 2-year-old is throwing a tantrum, you don't really want to engage in a very lengthy, sophisticated response set. You basically want to say to the kid, hey, scream as loud as you want, you're not getting candy. And so to the brain, saying top 3 things like, hey, brain, thanks for sharing, is a very dismissive response. Sometimes a response that, as I sort of call it, turning up the volume. So if a person has a thought, oh, maybe I'm going to stab my, family, to say, yeah, and after I stab my family, I'll stab the whole neighborhood, So in that regard, it's still a very quick, non-engaging response. Doesn't require a tremendous amount of mental effort, but it really, once again, shows the brain the disengaged irrelevance with it. So, and what's funny is one of my patients who had HOCD, he got so perfectionistic about finding the best therapeutic response to his questions about being gay that he actually invented a word. He just called it ishkadiddy, which is not a word, just sort of a noise. But the word ishkadiddy to him just represented such a disengagement from any topic related to his homosexuality that he was going to show his brain this dismissiveness through just not even saying anything, just kind of saying ishkadiddy, which means nothing. And so in a way, that was a very powerful way to show his brain that its questions about being gay also meant nothing. And so I found that very sophisticated, and it ultimately ended up being what shut his brain up about his homosexuality fears.
Yeah, really coming back to that irrelevance and enact like diffusion. So the next question, I suffer from emotional numbness. The more I obsess about my feelings, the worse I feel. Does Dr. Phillipson have any advice for this obsessive introspection which results in emotional numbness?
So, yeah, and I mentioned in my I Think It Moved article, which talks about gay OCD and relationship OCD. So similar to people who search for emotions to substantiate that they're with the proper partner, looking for emotions tends to have a paradoxical and opposite effect. So, to really just say to this person, whatever you're feeling at the moment, just make room for that awareness, even if that feeling is sort of a void or nothingness. Feelings are a derivative. The feelings are a byproduct of, our behavior, our belief systems, sometimes our fatigue. So feelings kind of come and go, and it's really important that we don't chase after them or look for them. It's like, the old joke, you go to a party and someone says, "Are we having fun yet?" The idea of chasing the expected emotions is really, a detriment to just naturally allowing them to occur.
Yeah.
And when you leave feelings to themselves, they tend to kind of reset back to, natural default, as opposed to, and, kind of being like, "Oh, look, I'm happy now." All of a sudden, boom, happy is gone because you try to grab onto it. So to be able to say, "Oh, I'm feeling depressed right now," and that's okay. I'm just going to make sure that my behaviors and my choices are unaltered. So I really place a lot of emphasis, particularly in the choice article, to not, kind of altering your life path. And if you're seeing that you're going through your life path as designed, as your priorities dictate, the feelings will naturally kind of follow when you don't chase them.
Yeah, really, really good point. Okay, so a very short question here is OCD or are OCD, not ROCD, ARE, are OCD and addiction related?
Oh, yeah, I hear that quite a bit. The answer is definitely not. Addictions are often kind of engaging with substances or activities. So, in addiction to, let's say, alcohol or cocaine or vaping, tobacco, these are reward-seeking behaviors. Heroin, these are behaviors that bring about pleasure. OCD is it's an effort to relinquish distress, to escape distress. So OCD is an escape-based mechanism, and addiction is an approach-based mechanism where a person seeks, let's say, the stimulation of gambling or the excitement of a new sexual partner, or the pleasure from nicotine, or the relaxation from alcohol. So it's a commonly asked question, but definitely they are completely unrelated. That's why I'm not really a big fan of like OCA, obsessive compulsive anonymous, because I don't really think there's treatment in that.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. And then, so next question, relating to intrusive thoughts, say harm or POCD, during deliberate exposures, I get that you're meant to bring on the worst thoughts or images you can with no mental compulsions to habituate and prove to the brain there is no danger. But
well, actually, let me stop you there.
Yeah.
That's a very common false premise. If we're trying to prove to the brain that I'm not really a danger, that's approaching it from a knowledge-based perspective, and OCD is not a knowledge-based perspective. So we're not trying to prove, "Oh, look, I'm not dangerous." It's a demonstration of the irrelevance of the association. So I'll sort of make that very, very important point. We're not trying to teach the brain that I'm not violent. We're not trying to teach the brain that I'm not a danger to children. We can just show the brain that its creative associations are irrelevant and meaningless.
Yeah, good distinction. And they go on to say, but what do we do when we have intrusive thoughts on the fly during our everyday lives? Do we invite the thoughts in or just try and move on without thought suppression? I find it difficult to detach from intrusive thoughts and just carry on with my day. Any advice gratefully received?
So this kind of gets back to, I think, a prior question in terms of, the three responses, and so, yeah, I would definitely encourage as much dismissiveness as possible and as little in the moment creative, kind of mind set. People try to come up with very sophisticated responses, and I think that's a mistake because by putting in a lot of effort to conjuring up a very sophisticated response, you're actually kind of demonstrating relevance to the topic by giving it so much mental effort to, kind of show it's meaningless. So, like I said before, being able to say, "Hey, thanks for sharing. That was a good one. Often even using humor in a very brief way can be very effective in neutralizing the brain's activity. So very much is important to, kind of really redirect your activities, back to something that, is more meaningful, whether it be, engaging in a conversation or watching a Netflix video, going back to your work process. It's just really important that you don't, become shifted in your focus, even though it is very difficult. The brain doesn't really want you to engage in a conversation when there's a fire, burning. I'd say, OCD is like being on the 40th floor of a building and there's a fire on the first 4 floors. Your brain wants you to get out of that building emotionally. So staying where you are and not seeking an escape plan, is a very, very difficult thing to do. But it's a very important thing that we override the emotional instinct to find the escape and kind of push ourselves through that distress, the gauntlet, as it were.
So next question. I see a private OCD therapist, brackets clinical psychologist, once a month. How long should I be doing my ERP homework for every day? That's the question. And I guess my initial response is obviously speak to your clinical psychologist. They should be advising you because it depends on the homework. But just anything you have to say on that. And it could just be, I guess, answering it more generally as for people doing homework. What do you advise?
So the frequency of doing exposure work is really predicated by the brain's kind of energy and activity. How much energy is still behind the topics that a person might be doing ERP about. So, with the index cards that I use, I have people monitor 3 different aspects of a spike: the intensity of it, the amount of ritualizing that's engaged with it, and the amount of resentment that a person has toward their own brain's independent activity. And so, when these numbers get very low, let's say below a 2, particularly with the ritualizing part of the self monitoring, then I just have the people discard, their index card because, the brain has disengaged from that topic due to the redundant exposure work. So the answer to the question is really determined by the brain's activity more than anyone or anything.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yes, over it being prescriptive, it's what's the brain doing, and if it's still doing a lot, we need to increase it. If it's calmed down, we don't need to do it constantly.
Yeah. And even at some point, I refer to OCD sometimes in its recovery as kind of a dormant volcano. The good news is that volcanoes can be dormant for hundreds of years. Sometimes they're dormant in Hawaii for like 2 days. So really, when a theme has become dormant with OCD, you can disengage from it. I tell people, the most important index card that you carry is the blank one, because it says to the brain, hey, brain, I'm ready for any challenge that you give me that you can sustain for 30 minutes. And that readiness and willingness in conveying to the brain the openness to having the associations is a very, very powerful message of acceptance.
Yeah, good point. Okay, so next question. I try and do 30 minutes of ERP each day, but I often find my anxiety hasn't reduced that much. Then when I finish ERP and say go for a walk or have a work meeting, I find I am super hypervigilant. Brain voice, speech marks here. Do you fancy that person? Was it started by the ERP pictures of kids, etc.? I'm not sure if I'm making much progress. What am I doing wrong? Am I not exposing for long enough? Am I coming out of the exposure too early? Is there perhaps some subtle mental compulsions, i.e. not fully inviting in the intrusive thoughts or neutralizing, so my brain still thinks there's danger?
this person sort of answered their own question. I
Okay.
think these hypotheses as to perhaps why habituation is not taking place, any of them are very possible and potentially valid. Obviously, not speaking to the person, I can't give a very clear, effective answer. But generally speaking, if a brain does not habituate, it generally means that there is some subtle answer-seeking activity and relevance giving to the brain's themes. So, in that regard, being a psychologist is often a lot like being a detective. You really have to kind of poke around and try to find out where and how a person might be sustaining the ritualizing or the relevance. Sometimes, even looking for a spike to go away is part of the problem. That's not the goal. We're not trying to get the brain to stop spiking us. We're just going to show the brain that no matter how often it spikes us, it's meaningless. So, a person who thinks that getting spiked 50 times a day is bad news is already ritualizing through that resentment. So that's one of the indicators on the index card that I have people monitor to make sure that they're not fueling their disorder by seeking its kind of elimination.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's where like inhibitory learning came in, right? And said you don't need to habituate in session or during the homework. Your brain's still learning something, even if your anxiety is high. So it's, kind of keep living your life. And as the more you read into it, you're then compulsing or judging it, as you say. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so this one, I've taken out some of the personal information, but it's a former patient of yours from about 20 years ago. And they say, my question is, have you ever had any patients with sensorimotor OCD associated with their anus and surrounding area? This is something I've been dealing with for a few years now. I've thrown out underwear for being too tight, and that was in speech marks. I constantly have to reposition myself in bed or sitting if I feel too much sensation down there. And my wife is forbidden from playfully grabbing my butt because she knows it may ruin my day. I also happen to have sexual orientation OCD, which I can't imagine is a coincidence.
Yeah,
I can't not.
I definitely was guessing that would be part of it also. So, the question is, to what degree does the person welcome the uncertainty about being gay? And, this person, their brain, informed them with the distress signal that, I'm assuming this person is a man, obviously. That gay men have a like a magnet around their anus, and that gay men are just absolutely always looking for something to go in there, in the exit hole. And so that's why this person's become preoccupied. The person thinks that if they're aware of anything in that area, that means that they're gay, because obviously all gay men are just totally focused on their anus, according to his brain, not myself. So yes, in that regard, he has sort of two battles. Obviously from his description, he's still being very, very fragile, about, things triggering, buttocks awareness. And so, rather than forbidding his wife from grabbing his tushy, I would say he should do the opposite. I think it would be important that he engage in a lot of exposures to trigger, the idea, oh, I'm aware of my butt, so therefore I must be gay, to kind of really lean into it rather than engaging with this fragility.
Yeah, maybe get some slightly tighter boxes than he would like. And yeah. All right, cool. And next one. So this is a very act-based question. I know you don't do act, but you are very act in a non-act way. So I'll ask it. When someone, especially related to act, says, just let the feelings happen and don't engage with it, I struggle to know what that actually means emotionally. If my head is telling me all kinds of completely incorrect information, am I supposed to just just accept it as truth in my head. If the answer is no, which it is, and that's my wording, and I should sort of thank my brain for throwing up that thought and let it be there, isn't that just engaging with the whole process again? And then my brain will think, am I accepting this? How do I know I'm accepting this? Isn't this just ruminating more? How do I stop that? And on it goes. Is this metacognition? Would be interesting to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, this is a common theme that can come up with these different layers where the spike theme almost becomes irrelevant. The real spike becomes what is the spike and what is the ritual. So, this person has to define for themselves the best way of conveying irrelevance. And as I said prior, the shortest and most, meaningless response that conveys irrelevance would certainly be recommended here. So, to say to your brain, thanks for sharing, isn't really engaging with a spike because this doesn't really take that much effort to conjure up that kind of a dismissive response. But one of, you call them number plates on the car.
Yeah.
So I have a personalized number plate and on my car, and it says WATTEVAH, which is in New York for whatever. And so in that regard, that can also be, a very wonderful dismissive response.
Yeah, good point. And I think I just add from like an ACT perspective, because the wording was in ACT. We're definitely not trying to accept the content of the thoughts as fact. That's a real misconception in ACT. And you'll obviously agree with this, but in ACT terms, we're just accepting the presence of the thought, that we're having a thought. Doesn't matter what the thought is, it's there, and the feeling. That's what we're accepting, which, of course you agree with. And then the other part I would say to them is, because she said, I think it's she, accepts even if she lets it be there, accepts the presence of the thought, and then the brain goes, yeah, but are you now ruminating? It brings in more questions. You accept the presence of that thought, and you keep going down, becoming the watcher almost. You're watching your thoughts. That's really one of the keys of ACT, which of course you do in your own way. So whatever your brain, you keep watching it, you keep pulling back, keep noticing.
Well, I would say, if the brain says, it is saying whatever, ritualizing, because you're trying to get rid of the thought, I would just kind of say, thanks, and then really kind of move on and get engaged with some activity topic that's not thematically related to figuring out OCD and decoding, the best response set available. That's why that patient came up with Ishkadidi, because he was engaging exactly like this. If he was just saying, oh yeah, I'm totally gay, I want nothing more than to have something go up my tuchus, like all gay men, according to the other patient, not me, then it just became so layered. His brain would be like, oh, isn't that ritualizing? Is that the best response? So, really to be able to say, as he did, Ishkadidi or whatever, thanks for sharing. And then really, as some people would say, redirecting, our attention and focus on things that we choose, that we give meaning to, rather than the brain choosing it.
Yeah, that's it. Well said. Okay, this is a long description, but it was worth adding in, because I think it comes up a lot in culture and society, and I think it massively plagues people with OCD. So the question is, I have a question around a bit more detail on the magic thinking episode, which of course we did. I would love to have his thoughts, that's you, on the new age mystical world. Growing up, my mum was into this, and as a curious teenager, I would read some of her books. A lot of the philosophy was around you create your own external world and experiences with your thoughts. So thinking positive and visualizing what you want can magically create it into existence. And on the other hand, thinking negatively can create negative experiences. This was quite petrifying to read for someone with OCD. And ever since, I have inflated responsibility that any negative, intrusive thought could have dire consequences. I was just wondering, where did this idea come from? That's question one. I cut out a lot here, but he kind of goes on to answer his own question. He gives some real good examples of why this idea may have come, where it may have come from. It says it must be historical, derived from somewhere to be published in so many books. I would love to hear more scientific perspective on this. And then I cut out the other stuff. But then the next bit is it just confirmation bias? So training the reader to only see the good in their life and become ignorant to the negative? Question mark. One more thing I'd like to mention is that a lot of therapists offer a lot of reassurance around intrusive thoughts regarding thoughts of them, brackets, doing harm to others as meaningless and something that they would never act on, opposite of their character and what they really want, etc. There is not much evidence on intrusive thoughts that may feel like premonitions or I had this thought, e.g., will this negative experience now happen to me or a loved one? I know it's against the living with uncertainty, but it would be nice to be reassured too that there is no scientific evidence that thoughts can change probabilities in the real world. So there is a reassurance here. I mean, he or she's acknowledging this. But I think there is a key trigger here in that books like The Secret and other stuff, not to say they're wrong, but they do trigger a lot of people with OCD to think, well, if I think I'm going to be a millionaire, then I'll become a millionaire. And if that's the case, if I think about abusing someone, I'm going to abuse someone. You know, that they make that sort of assumption.
Yeah, there's a phrase that was popular in the 90s with OCD called thought action fusion. The idea that if I have a thought of harming someone, then it increases the possibility that action might take place. So that being sort of a sub-theme within OCD. In terms of, scientific evidence about, we would call it manifesting. Have you heard of that term, manifesting? Meaning, if I have the thought, my boat is going to sink in the next storm, then I'm manifesting that potential reality. And then we won't be able to hang out on the boat anymore, Stu. But I mean, I don't believe in manifesting. I don't believe in the idea that our thoughts alter the universe in some way. So I can say, forces of the universe, please sink my boat within the next week. I can say that and not really have any concern that I've altered the fate of my boat.
Yeah, good point. I would add a slight variation on that in thoughts can alter the universe, but they need to be backed by action. So I could think about being a millionaire, visualize it, plan for it, but if I don't work hard, create a good business plan, action that business plan every day, no matter how much I think I'm going to be a millionaire, it's not going to happen. And that's not one of my goals, by the way. But you know what I mean? Yeah.
Sure. One of our country's founders, Thomas Jefferson, said, I find that the harder I work, the luckier I get.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was a very, very funny and brilliant way of talking about luck. Rather than having it or not having it, I think what you just said about manifesting it through our actions and our efforts is a critical part of it.
Yeah, of course, and probably reassuring. But almost everyone with OCD have these far out thoughts, or everyone, they're not doing the actions, which is why it stays in fantasy land and doesn't become real. But of course, that doesn't matter because again, that's cognitive. But yeah, okay, yeah, fair enough. So again, but there's this person, it's really stuck in their head. It probably was quite scary at that young age to read that. But still ERP going through the motions there and trying to make space and face those fears of manifestation. Yeah. Cool. Steven's nodding. So
I agree.
Okay, good. Okay, one last question I got added from the listeners today. I think judging by reading this, I think this is from a therapist, but they said, when I've gone through all the ways to stop ruminating and deal with the intrusive thoughts, and the client says, I can't, and does the opposite of what he agreed was the best to handle it, which way do we go? So I read this a few times to try and make sense of it. I think they mean, we've said this is how we deal with rumination and intrusive thoughts. The client's almost doing the opposite and almost refusing to do what they, to show irrelevance, to do all this. And then the question is, which way do they go? So I guess it's, how do you deal with that? I put it as resistance, maybe to the therapeutic tools. At least that's how I interpreted it. So if you have a client that's refusing, I don't see refusing in there being like defiant, but like for whatever reason, they're not maybe buying into the things you're telling them, like the irrelevance and all of that. How do you kind of get them on board?
I tell my staff regularly in supervision that our job as clinicians, as psychologists, is not to help our patients. All we can do are offer tools and strategies that if our patient accepts and integrates and utilizes, they can derive a tremendous benefit from treatment. But I don't look at it as in, I'm going to, get a patient to become on board with the therapeutic strategies. With patients who have HOCD, they'll say things like, I don't care if I'm gay, that would be fine with me. But, it's not fair to my partner. If my partner thinks that they're with a straight person and I'm actually gay, then I've deceived them. And so you often, with HOCD, run into a kind of a perfectionistic mindset with the idea of, integrity being a person's authentic value. And so the person's OCD in my gay spike is driven by their authentic interests in not being, ingenuine. And that can be a tough one, to get around, because I say to patients, are we dealing with OCD here, or are we dealing with sexual orientation questions? Because, I'm here to work with you and treat, offer treatment strategies for OCD. We're not really going to be able to figure out whether you're gay or not, or whether you're, harmful or not, or whether you've offended God or not. Because people who are religious often have a very difficult time engaging in exposure work that says, oh, Jesus was a big jerk, he got so angry in the temple and he just threw stuff around, for people who, worship Jesus, that can be, values betraying, for them to, be willing to kind of engage in that type of aggressive exposure work.
Yeah, good point. And of course, it's all tongue in cheek. It's not. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. It's tough when, like you said, the balancing the values bit and not encroaching too much on that if people don't want to go there. But all right, awesome. Those are all the questions that I pulled out. Thank you to everyone that took the time to write a question, and I hope that helps and was interesting. And if people like it, I'll do more of these types of episodes. But Steve, thank you as always for your time. I appreciate it.
So once again, it's great seeing you. And I appreciate the invitation. It's been, as always, a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this week's podcast. And thank you to our Patreons who helped make this episode possible. And if you would like to find out more about Patreon and the rewards and benefits, then there will be a link in the episode description. If you enjoy the OCD Stories podcast and would like to support us with a one-time tip/donation, please go to theocdstories.com/support. All tips, no matter how large or small, are greatly appreciated. Please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to the podcast. And thank you to NoCD for supporting our work. If you want to find out more about NoCD, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD stories or click the link in the episode description. And quick disclaimer, guys, this podcast is not therapy. It is not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And until we speak, take care.